Morning Apex team, and welcome to our product training on filters today. We're going to start with the oil filters. Quite often you're going to a shop, majority of the time the guys will want a good quality oil filter. The reason for this is, I'm going to take this one apart to show you. In your filters you have what we call a pressure relief valve. The cheap filters either don't have the valve or they're missing the housing for the valve. The other thing the cheap filters do is they use a cheaper grade paper and they don't use as many folds on the paper. Now, the more folds there are on the paper, the better the filtration. So if you take a vehicle that's run for a very long time and you take the sump off, you'll find carbon in the sump. Now, if you've got bad filtration, that carbon is going to work its way through your motor and end up damaging your crankshaft bearings and your cam bearings and all the rotating parts that rotate with oil on them, which is then going to lead to premature engine failure. As I was saying, the first thing they do is they either leave out the valve or they use a cheap filter paper. If you look at this example over here, this is a cheaper filter and you can see how the paper indents over there and there's no reinforcing on this filter. This is a cartridge filter. Look at this. This is a reinforced filter. It's kept its shape and its form through its process. These are used filters that have been in engines. The other thing they do is they use cheap O-rings. On the top of the filter is an O-ring that seals onto the filter housing. Now if you take a good quality O-ring, this has been in a vehicle, it's still flexible and pliable, which means it's still going to seal. If you take the cheaper filters, they just break. And now if they're going to trick you into believing there is a valve, these valves operate pressures worked out by the manufacturers when they build a vehicle. So what they will do, they will put in cheap valve with a really thin spring and they will use that throughout all their filters. Whereas if it's a quality filter, the spring is going to determine the pressure that the filter opens and closes at, if it's needed. And the reason you have this valve, if your filter blocks for some odd reason and your engine runs dry, you're going to seize the motor. This bypass valve allows oil to then circulate, even though it's not clean oil, through your engine, saving your engine and giving you time to switch the motor off and have the vehicle towed in and the fault diagnosed and sorted out. The other problem is if it has to have a bypass valve in it and they put in the wrong pressure valve, your oil can bypass the filtration system from start of engine. So why do you think your vehicle, you've got a brand new filter in and you have this protection? If the bypass valve is not set correctly, it's just going to bypass, and then as your oil gets dirtier, it's just going to circulate through your motor, again leading to premature failure. That's why a good filter costs what it costs. Moving along to your fuel filters, these are your fuel injection filters. And again, we'll use a cheaper paper, fewer folds. These filters will break down under the pressure. You must remember your fuel injection system operates from 0.8 of a bar upward. And some vehicles are 2 bar, which is really high pressure. So if you don't have the correct grade of filter paper in this, it's going to break down and cause its own blockages. The other thing that's going to happen is, even though we believe our fuel is clean, our fuel contains moisture in. And these filters aid in preventing that moisture working through your fuel system, causing rust to your undercarriage fuel lines, causing damage to your injectors, and even condensation inside the motor. So that's where a decent fuel filter plays a role. Now I know a lot of the guys think, well, I need a decent oil filter, but I could use a cheap fuel filter and a cheap air filter. The fact of the matter is you can, but the long-term impact on your vehicle is not, in my opinion, worth saving 80 or 100 Rand on a filter. So these filters will then filter out or trap the moisture behind the filter, so it does work through your fuel system. Your fuel tank has a breather on it to allow for expansion and contraction of the gases in the fuel tank. So what often happens is, because of the breather and the opening and closing of your fuel tank every time you fill up, you get a fine layer of dust that accumulates in your fuel tank. That will then get trapped by this filter. If you've got an old vehicle with a carburetor, if you don't have a good filter, that's going to move through and start blocking your jets and causing idling issues and performance issues. On your fuel injection side, it can block the injectors or it can damage the injectors to the point, and when you switch your vehicle off at night, you still have fuel pressure in your fuel lines. Now, if your injector is damaged, it's going to leak, cause overfueling of your fuel system, and cause engine wash or fuel wash on your cylinders, washing the oil off your cylinders, and then also ending up that your engine seizes. So that's why it's important to fit decent fuel filters. Now we'll come to air filters, and a lot of guys will say, oh, it just stops the dust. What we've managed to do is we've managed to get used filters that are decent OEM spec filters to show you. If you look at that filter, you can see the dirt on the outside of the filter. This is the side of the filter that goes to your motor, to your intake. This is the side of the filter where your air intake comes in from outside. If you look at that, you can see the dirt in that filter. And this is town driving. What happens is when they manufacture the air filters, to manufacture them cheaper, again, they use a different grade of material, of paper. They reduce the amount of folds, and they either don't put in the reinforcing or they put in a very, very flimsy reinforcing. What that's for is, even though there's filters in a housing, you do suck condensation through. So besides stopping the condensation, you need the reinforcing in the correct filter paper, so that doesn't happen to your filter if it gets moist. The problem with that is your folds then close and you don't really have filtration. It's now blocking your system. So you start using more fuel. And eventually that will break down and your vehicle will start sucking particles bigger than you want through the fuel system. That was a fitted filter. This is a Filtron filter. You can see how thick the reinforcing is. And you can see if you push these together, their spacing returns to where it should be, giving you greater filtration on your air intake. The other way they do it is some vehicle applications will call for flame retardant materials in the air filter system. Vehicles that backfire excessively. So now if you don't have that, total ashes, these have been treated with flame retardant materials, and you can see how it hasn't burned through or ignited the filter material. That's very important, otherwise the car is gone. Paper isn't just paper. When it comes to filter papers, it's got to do with the microscopic makeup of the material. So these papers are rolled to give you this rippled effect, and you compare it to your cheaper filters, almost like a tissue paper. The thing that your oil filters do, as your fuel has moisture in it, so does your oil. If you take a look at this, water floating on top of the oil. Oil filters also prevent that water working through into your engine system. The last filter we're going to look at is cabin filters. We've got some samples here. This is a cheaper filter paper. You can see it's thin, it's almost transparent. Your better grade filter paper, it looks more cottony and it's got texture to it and it's a thicker paper. The amount of folds in the filter will give you total length on your filter paper. The greater the length, the better the filtration properties of that filter. People think, well, it's just there to keep the dust out. Not necessarily. Cabin filters are also there. They're called pollen filters for a reason, and that's to try and help you with your allergies while you're driving your vehicle. And not just allergies, things like smoke if you drive past and the grass is burning on the side of the road, or a chemical tank has had a spill. On your upper end of your cabin filters, we have filters that are impregnated with carbon. And that will absorb all the impurities in the air, giving you clean, fresh air in your vehicle. This is just a cabin filter where your air intake is a lot less than what your air intake on your air filter would be. I'll show you how much dust actually comes through. These were in the vehicle for their service interval, which I think is about 15,000 Ks. There you can see all the dust on the folds. And that's the cleaner side of it, where you can see how the filtration paper has done its work and it's stopped all of that coming into the vehicle. Yes, there's an argument for cheap filters, but if you look at the long-term effects on your vehicle, whether it be the air filter preventing fine particles coming into your fuel system and causing top-end wear on your valve guides, on your valves and on the top of your bores, to your oil filter where clean oil is essential to longevity of the motor, or fuel filter that's preventing dirt and moisture getting into your fuel system and causing expensive maintenance on injectors. You know, you could go and inject it from 1,000 Rand up to some of the new diesel vehicles are 45,000 Rand an injector. So where you think you're saving 100 Rand, Yes, you're saving the 100 Rand here, but you're going to be spending it later on maintenance and repairs. So guys, I hope you've enjoyed that. If there's any questions, please feel free to contact me and ask me. Thank you.